Welcome to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility, an ongoing inquiry into American political origins and evolving institutions. The Executive Director of the Virtual Center is Dr. Bill O'Brien. He's also your host for this continuing conversation. Here he is now, Dr. Bill O'Brien.
Thank you, Bob Kincaid, and welcome to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility on this Tuesday. Today is the Ides of March. Today is the 15th of March in the year 2016. It is a pleasure to be with you today. The Ides of March is a special day for me because it's my wife's birthday as well. And lo and behold, I haven't had a chance so far today to go out and get a card or a gift or anything. So when we get off the air today, I'm going to have to get busy. I got a number of chores and some running to do today, so it's going to be a little bit tight. But I can't let the day go by without at least acknowledging it. Now, actually, I already have. Welcome to today's edition of the Virtual Center. As you, I'm sure, realize, it is a Tuesday, and we are beginning our program 30 minutes later than we do on Mondays and Wednesdays today. It is the political season. I just left a Rotary meeting here in Beckley, West Virginia. The three candidates for the mayor of Beckley were constituted our program today, and it was very interesting. There were a number of announcements about fundraisers and all of this other things. So the national scene is not the only place. The presidential race is not the only place that politics is underway. It's here, it's there, it's everywhere. We do invite you, and I'm really interested in this concept of the authoritarian personality that we introduced on yesterday, and we'll be back into that today. I'm really interested in your thoughts on this particular concept. We have a phone number that will get you on the air. And if you are so inclined to call and share your thoughts or your ideas, we would love to hear from you. Our phone number is area code 304-663-4676. 304-663-4676. My email address, if you'd like to communicate one-on-one with me directly, waobrien906@gmail.com. waobrien, OBRIEN 906@gmail.com. And again, I remind you about our Facebook page. The last entry thing that I published on our Facebook page for the Virtual Center was over the weekend, I believe. I know I didn't put anything additional on there on yesterday, because I knew that we were only halfway through the idea or the concept of the authoritarian personality. So I didn't want to do anything to divert attention from it. But there is quite a bit on our Facebook page, and now that I think about it, I just recall that I did put something on the Facebook page since the authoritarian personality entry over the weekend. In fact, let me share that with you because it's kind of interesting. At a town hall meeting in Ohio as part of the campaign, Hillary Clinton was talking about I don't really know what prompted the issue, but I'm guessing that somebody had asked a question of her at this town meeting about climate change. The reason I say that because she got into the issue of the transition away from fossil fuels. And in the course of her response or her statement, she made the statement that we're going to cause serious displacement for a lot of people and a lot of coal companies. And so, in a sense, she raised the flag of what the transition away from fossil fuels is causing or will cause in terms of disruption of people's lives. That particular statement that Hillary Clinton made is getting a lot of traction here in West Virginia. I've seen it in a number of different places. I've seen people comment on it. I've seen one person after the other post that particular video so that people, their friends on Facebook, will be able to see and hear Hillary Clinton make the statement about costing a significant number of jobs and the demise of coal companies because of the transition. What is happening politically here in West Virginia, however, is that particular statement is being used to suggest that Hillary Clinton merely promises 4 more years of Barack Obama. And here in West Virginia, the implication is that means 4 more years of the war on coal. And that particular statement that Hillary made about the loss of jobs for people and the demise of coal companies is being used to reinforce the attack on Hillary Clinton that she promises a continuation of the Obama administration's war on coal. The fact of the matter is, if you watch the entire video, you begin to realize very quickly that this particular statement that she made is being taken out of context. We've talked about this phenomenon numerous times, that by pulling things out of context, you can literally change the meaning 180 degrees. And indeed, that's exactly what's happening. Because what Hillary Clinton's point was in this town meeting was that as we transition away from fossil fuels, we are causing a lot of pain and anguish for a lot of people, and we're threatening the demise of a number of coal companies. So when she says we're looking at the loss of a lot of jobs, coal jobs, she is saying it within the context of a commitment that she is making, that should she be elected president, she's going to make a special effort to enable the government to move in and assist these people in the transition away from fossil fuels. In other words, what her intent of the entire statement was concern for people. And what she was doing was indicating that she was very aware of how difficult these kinds of major changes are for individual citizens. And she was committing her administration to assisting in that transition. None of that context appeared here in West Virginia, although the video itself is on, it was put on Facebook a number of times by a number of different people. One of the individuals here in West Virginia who is making a major issue out of this particular statement by Hillary Clinton is the Attorney General for the state of West Virginia, Patrick Morrisey, who is a Republican. And he is using it in the political context of attacking Hillary Clinton. The fact of the matter is, Hillary Clinton, in that statement, showed a lot more concern and a lot more sensitivity towards the displacement of people than Patrick Morrisey has done here in West Virginia, or than any of the coal companies involved here in West Virginia have done. The point that I put on Facebook, the entry that I posted on Facebook yesterday, is, I believe, called for. It basically suggests that it is not an accident that many of the elections for judicial positions throughout West Virginia have been changed to nonpartisan elections. because the thinking is that our legal system, our judicial system, should be nonpartisan. And what that to me indicates is that for the chief legal officer for the state of West Virginia, the Attorney General, the people's lawyer, to take a position, a clearly political partisan position on a significant issue like this, it seems to me is extremely questionable. But it goes even further than that. For the person to whom West Virginians are asked to look for justice, to participate in taking a statement out of context and manipulating and twisting the meaning in order to support a particular political position that he wants to take, it seems to me is unconscionable. And the fact of the matter is, and I put this as my final paragraph, the fact of the matter is 30 years ago here in West Virginia, the media was engaged in an ongoing discussion of the challenges that West Virginia would face when coal access to coal, cheap coal, was finished here in West Virginia. The predictions were that coal in West Virginia had 20 to 25 years left. And then most of the easiest coal to mine would be gone. And at that point, mining coal would become so expensive that the assumption was that coal would gradually be phased out as West Virginia's leading industry. And the media's position was that the state has 20 to 25 years to prepare for this transition and to begin to move more aggressively towards a diversification of the state's economy in order to ease the pain and the dislocation associated with such a transition in energy. The state of West Virginia did nothing to prepare for this transition. But more important, the coal companies themselves did nothing to prepare for this transition except to run more and more and more coal. It's obvious that their reaction was, if the amount of mineable coal is diminishing, then we need to get as much of it out as quickly as we can before the industry begins to die, because it was very obvious that the nation and the world was looking very, very seriously at transitioning away from fossil fuels. So when the industry saw this, they took actions to protect themselves, but did nothing to prepare the people who were employed in the coal industry for what is a very painful dislocation that is currently going on here. And so when the gavel fell, so to speak, when the issue really became serious over the last 12 to 18 months, and mines one after the other began to close here in West Virginia, and dozens and hundreds, and I'm guessing several thousand mining employees lost their jobs over the last 12 months. When the region really began to feel the pain, how did the industry receive it? They immediately began to shift the blame to President Obama, to the EPA in Washington, and to the Obama administration restrictions on coal production, which were costing jobs. The fact of the matter is, what the Obama administration is doing didn't cost these jobs. It was being predicted 25 and 30 years ago that these jobs were going to disappear, and the state was put on notice, and these companies were put on notice that they needed to do something in order to ease the transition that was coming. And they did nothing except to try to take more faster while it was possible. And for the Attorney General of our state to participate in this highly political, highly charged, and rather dishonest effort to reassign the blame from the people who are responsible for it to the administration in Washington. President Obama was not even a figment of anybody's imagination when this state was being warned about the problems coming in the mining of coal. That's the entry that I put on Facebook, and I totally forgot it when I was saying that I hadn't put anything on Facebook since the authoritarian personality. I put that on because I think it's very significant and it's quite important. I think people need to be aware of that. So with that, I'd like to return to the focus of our programs yesterday and today, which is the nature of the authoritarian personality. And of course, the theme for this, or what we're anticipating or leading to here, is the extent to which one's understanding of the authoritarian personality can help explain the phenomenon that we are witnessing in our national presidential campaigns right now, most specifically the popularity of one Donald Trump. And we're doing it on this Tuesday, the 15th of March, when 5 states are going to the polls in primaries, Republican primaries. 2 of those states, Florida and Ohio, are winner-take-all states. That means that the candidate who wins the most votes, even if it's just by 1 vote, secures the support of all the state's delegations at the convention through the first ballot. And the implication is, if no candidate receives the required 1,237 votes in the first ballot at the convention, then these delegates are no longer committed to the candidate who won the state, or who won those delegates in the state's primary. In other words, it's an open convention at that point. So that reality seems to explain the campaign strategies of the Marco Rubios and John Kasich's and Ted Cruz's, and of course Donald Trump himself. The theory, of course, or the idea is that from Trump's perspective, if he can lock up the nomination by securing the commitment of 1,237 delegates before the convention even meets, then the convention becomes a formality to just assign him or award him the nomination. But if no candidate has the 1,237, then you get into the internal politics of conventions that the primary system has, for the most part, eliminated. I can remember, I think I mentioned this yesterday, I can remember in the 50s and late 50s and 60s and 70s that it was regular practice that conventions were the place that candidates were nominated. It's only since the primaries were introduced that the conventions have become rather boring affairs, because there's little serious business to be done there. Most of the serious decisions have been made before the convention even meets. So should this situation unfold, should we come to July to the Republican convention in Cleveland, and with nobody having the necessary 1,237 delegates pledged, then the convention will undertake the choosing of the Republican Party's nominee. And the questions are, of course, flying all around whether, in fact, the Republican Party would dare deny Donald Trump the the nomination, whether in fact he has the minimum, the required number or not. He'll have so many, he'll be so close, that the thinking is that it's probably going to be very difficult politically to deny him the nomination. On the other hand, the Kasichs and the Rubios and the Cruzes, I believe, Ted Cruz as well, are believing that if the convention convenes and Donald Trump does not have the requisite number he needs to secure the nomination, that it's open season, that the nomination is back in play for everybody. And so that's really the situation, the background, if you will, that we're looking for. I mentioned yesterday, as part of our program, the nature of the authoritarian personality. And what I wanted to emphasize at the very beginning is the fact that while most people assume the very name, authoritarian personality, the title, would seem to suggest a desire for power on the part of the leader who would have authoritarian tendencies. In other words, the desire for power, the need for power and visibility and applause and publicity and all of these things. While most people would assume that a term like authoritarian personality would refer principally to the leader, the fact of the matter is the real substance of the authoritarian personality idea focuses more not on the leader, but on those who choose to follow that particular leader, focusing on the followers rather than the leader. And the very title, authoritarian personality, suggests that there's something in the personality, something in the makeup of those people who line up in support of a very strong, egotistical, aggressive, bombastic kind of candidate like Donald Trump. In other words, the conclusion or the implication of this whole concept is that the popularity of Donald Trump probably says more about the people supporting him than it does about him. Because one of the things we've noticed is that no matter what negatives come out about Donald Trump, no matter how many examples come out of speeches that Trump has given where he seems to have changed his tune, where he has contradicted himself. I think on the news last night I caught a glimpse of Bernie Sanders making the comment that Donald Trump is a pathological liar. And that's the same kind of criticism we've been getting from Rubio and from Ted Cruz all along. But it's the first time that Bernie Sanders has come out. And of course, all of it revolves around the violence that has occurred in recent days at Trump rallies. And the specific allegation of Bernie Sanders stems from the fact that Donald Trump has denied the fact that he promised to consider paying the legal expenses of the person at his rally who gave the sucker punch, the elbow, to the protester on the protester's way out of the rally. Many of you remember that the member of the Trump rally, as he was identified, is 78 years old, and this African American younger person was being led out of the rally as Trump was standing up on the stage saying, "Get him out, get him out, get him out." And unsuspectingly, this 78-year-old supporter of Donald Trump hit this guy with an elbow that was pretty devastating. It's been all over TV. And as a result of that, Donald Trump has, I've heard him numerous times make the statement that he had his people looking into the possibility of taking care of the legal expenses of this guy. And Trump's argument is that, you know, the people who support us, we support them, type of thing. Well, this turns out at the 11th hour, so to speak, just prior to today's election, that Donald Trump apparently is backtracking and denying that he did make that commitment. In fact, I heard this morning on the Morning Joe show that Donald Trump, in an earlier interview on the Today Show today, denied that he ever made that legal commitment. My point is that there are several instances of contradictions and backtracking and changes in positions that Donald Trump has made. But none of it seems to have any effect on the degree of support for Donald Trump. That if anything, these kinds of criticisms and these kinds of attacks seem to strengthen people's commitment to Donald Trump. And that's really the issue about the nature of the authoritarian personality. A situation like this seems to suggest more or reveal more about the followers than it does the leader. However, it's important, and I'm getting into something a little bit technical here, but I think it's important to at least acknowledge and mention. This reality about the emphasis on the followers can lead to the conclusion that it's all about the followers and not about the leader at all. I think for purposes of clarification and understanding, we need to be aware that that's not necessarily true. And if you go back half a century, back to the name Erich Fromm, the famous psychologist and sociologist in Europe in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. Erich Fromm did some serious writing and research associated with the concept of the authoritarian personality. And his contribution to our understanding of this whole issue is to emphasize what he calls the symbiotic relationship between leader and follower. In other words, Erich Fromm points out that in discussing the authoritarian personality, clearly you don't focus just on the leader. But on the other hand, he's pointing out you don't just focus on the followers either. Because the fact of the matter is, there's a symbiotic relationship between the two. In other words, they need each other. And as strong as is the need of followers to line up and be associated with a strong personality, a strong character, like Donald Trump. Erich Fromm points out that there are characteristics within the strong leader that needs the followers as well. That there's something in the psychology of the leader that demands power and visibility and popularity and applause. That what Erich Fromm was talking about, that as people demonstrate their support for the strong leader, the leader begins to experience needs, satisfy needs that make him or her who he is or who she is. And I've watched this, and I've seen it in videos. I've seen it at Trump rallies. There's something about the personality of Donald Trump, and I'm just speculating. This is all within my own head here. The contrast between Donald Trump in a one-on-one interview with any particular person in the media. I've seen numerous examples. I've seen him on the Today Show. I've seen him on Morning Joe. I've seen him on CNN. I've seen him on CBS. He calls in almost every day to one of the morning shows, whether it's the Today Show or whether it's the Morning Joe show on MSNBC or whether it's Fox. He kind of stirs it up every day. Donald Trump has made sure that he is the lead story in every day's news. So that even though he is self-funding his campaign, the fact of the matter is he has made sure that it's not costing him all of that much money. Because the news media is all over everything he says and everything he does. He's news every day. He's getting free publicity every day. His campaign is never off the evening news. His campaign is never off the front page of the nation's newspapers. So the fact of the matter is he hasn't been forced to dig too deeply into his personal fortune in order to fund his own campaign. Because much of the publicity and much of the attention he's getting for nothing. He's getting it free. Yet he seems to open every rally by emphasizing the fact that he's funding his own campaign so that he can not be beholden or not owned by any of the heavy contributors, the big money backers, the donors. So he's touting his independence from the big money donors, and indeed it's not there. He's not needed their money. He's not even needed his own money. There's something driving the personality here that almost demands that he be the center of attention. On the internet this morning, I was pointing out to my wife that in his estate, his mansion in West Palm Beach, Florida, there's a portrait of Donald Trump as a younger man. A huge portrait that graces that mansion. I called my wife in because I thought she would be interested, because we happen to know a couple of people that are somewhat the same. In other words, self-portraits tend to dominate the place where they live. There's a story going around the local community here that one of our local colleges some years ago, the president contracted to have his own bust, bronze bust made and put in the entryway into one of the main buildings on the campus. It was almost like the entire institution was seen. The president almost saw the entire institution as a monument to himself. And it's that kind of ego and that kind of demand for power that we're talking about. And that's what Eric Fromm is talking about. That with that kind of innate need, psychological need for attention and publicity and visibility and power and influence and all the rest of it, it's clear that the support that this personality is receiving from followers is critical to what makes that particular leader tick. And that's what Erich Fromm is talking about. And he spends time trying to separate the idea of the authoritarian personality by defining that aspect of it which applies to the leader and contrasting it with that aspect of it which applies to the followers. Let me share with you a couple of paragraphs where Erich Fromm makes this clear. He points out that in reality, the authoritarian personality, the authoritarian character, for whatever reason, is a character or a personality that has never fully matured. In other words, it has never fully become totally independent. It still has needs. And whether you're talking followers or whether you're talking leaders, we're talking about psychological need here. Erich Fromm says there are then two forms of the authoritarian personality that are actually tightly bound together. What they have in common, what defines the essence of the authoritarian personality, is an inability. The inability to rely on oneself, to be independent, to put it in other words, to endure freedom. Because the authoritarian personality indicates such strong need, Fromm is saying these people can never enjoy or experience the fulfillment of maturity and independence because they never quite reach it. And then he goes through the development of most human beings. And he said and this I think is significant. He said the opposite of the authoritarian character or the authoritarian personality is the mature person. A person who does not need to cling to others because he actively embraces and grasps the world, its people, and the things around him. Children still need to cling. In their mother's womb, in a physical sense, they are one with their mother. After birth and for several months thereafter, and even in some cases for years after, they remain in a psychological sense still a part of their mother. They do not exist as independent individuals separate from their mother as yet. Children couldn't exist without the mother's help, but they continue to grow and develop. They learn to walk, they learn to talk, they learn to find their way around the world, and eventually that world becomes their world. And children, as they mature, possess two skills inherent in an individual. These two skills are love and reason. Love, Erich Fromm says, is the bond and the feeling of being one with the world while keeping one's own independence and integrity. Erich Fromm is defining love as the individual's ability to recognize that we're all part of something bigger, that all life is somehow connected. But at the same time, these people are mature enough to recognize that while we are all connected and while we are all independent, we are all also individuals. And as such, we need to be self-sufficient. We need to exist independently of others. And Erich Fromm believes that true love is the recognition or the appreciation of that very complex relationship between individuals and the community at large and the world at large. He says love means recognizing the world as an emotional experience. He said, however, there's also another way of recognizing and understanding the world, namely with the mind. We call this kind of understanding reason. It's different from intelligence, he says. Intelligence is being able to use the mind in order to achieve certain goals. In other words, certain things you want and you're able to manipulate until you're able to achieve the particular things you want. This, he says, is the intelligence of the animal. He talks about experiments in laboratories with chimpanzees and such, who are able to manipulate the world around them in order to get what they want. A banana, for example. Reason, he points out, is something different. Reason is the activity of the mind which attempts to get through the surface to reach the core of things, to grasp what really lies behind these things, what the forces and drives are that themselves invisible operate and determine the world. So to Fromm, the mature person is the person who has command of both love and reason, the ability to understand himself and understand how he relates to and is in part of the world around him. And reason, the intellectual understanding of the essence of the world around us, the core, the basis of everything else. Intelligence, he said, is the mere manipulation of the world around us in order to achieve particular goals or particular ends. But reason is the ability to understand the essence of the core of the world around us. Obviously, what's in my mind right now is the concept, the idea of the Common Core, because that's what the Common Core is about. It's trying to get at the substance, the very basic essence of education, find a way to build curriculum on it, and allow students to develop with the Common Core knowledge as a foundation. You go back 40 years to Erich Fromm, and he's talking about the same kinds of ideas or the same kinds of concepts. All right? If that's what the mature person, the non-authoritarian person is about, how does the authoritarian personality fit into all of this? Where does it come from? He points out, and I'm reading from Erich Fromm here, the authoritarian character has not reached maturity. He can neither love nor make use of reason. As a result, he's extremely alone, which means that he's gripped by a deeply rooted fear. He needs to feel a bond which requires neither love nor reason. And he finds it in the symbiotic relationship, in feeling one with others, not by reserving his own identity, but rather by fusing, by destroying his own identity. The authoritarian character needs another person to fuse with him because he cannot endure his own aloneness and his own fear. What we're talking about then with the authoritarian personality is fear. Are people who, for whatever reason, are unable to see themselves fully and totally as individuals. Somehow they have missed something in development. The leader has it for the crowd that gives him so much applause. But those in the audience who applaud the loudest have that same need of the leader. The desire or the quest for security, for predictability, for order. These people are threatened by disorder. They are threatened by change. They are threatened by the unknown. And they gravitate to the strong leader who will promise them that they will resist and prevent the change, and that they will return tradition. They'll bring back the order and the security which seems to have been lost. And ultimately what that means is all of those things, all of those people, all of those issues which threaten the authoritarian personality are issues that the authoritarian character must oppose or must resist. In Donald Trump's case, it's keeping out all the Muslims. It's keeping out all the Mexicans. It's making sure or keeping women in their place. It's opposing same-sex marriage. It's dominating the world militarily and physically. It's decision-making and foreign policy driven by power more than anything else. The constant reference to the fact that the American military has been decimated by President Obama. The fact of the matter being that the size of the American military and the size of the budget, the defense budget in this country, is twice, 3 times the budget of all the other major powers put together. This is the most powerful, the most expensive, the most well-equipped military establishment in the history of the world. Why is it that candidates, Republican candidates, Marco Rubio's guilty of this as well, along with Donald Trump and others, talk about the decimation and the weaknesses of the American military? And the fact of the matter is, the American military has been developed and equipped for a world that is changing. And it is having difficulty changing with it. And if you take Erich Fromm and the other philosophers and psychologists who deal with the concept of the authoritarian personality, what those who support Donald Trump believe is that Donald Trump will restore the world to the world that used to be, which we dominated, which we controlled militarily as well as economically. Rather than adjust to the changes that are taking place in the world, we set out to declare war on change. And those people who feel threatened by those changes gravitate to that personality. They're drawn into it, almost like a vacuum. Sweeper picks up dust. That, it seems to me, is what we're talking about here with the authoritarian personality. I thought that I would take the opportunity to share with you some of the latest research into this concept as it applies to our current political situation. In the last 20 years, since about the turn of the millennium, since about 2000, this is 2016, and especially since 9/11 in 2001, philosophers and political scientists have been engaged in extensive research on the degree to which the authoritarian personality might apply to and help us understand better the nature of our politics, the nature of our political systems, who's winning elections and who's not winning elections and why. There's a tremendous study put out by Vox, V-O-X, online. Just Google Vox on the authoritarian personality. It's an extensive study on the rise of American authoritarianism. The author is Amanda Taub, and it hit the internet on March 1st, 2016. So this is fairly recent stuff. Today's only March 15th. And this extensive study of the rise of American authoritarianism deals with questions like, what is American authoritarianism? How does authoritarianism work? Can it be explained? How do we explain it? How does Donald Trump and authoritarianism connect? What is America's changing social landscape? What is it that authoritarians want? What is it that the authoritarian personality of Donald Trump promises these people that causes their support to be so strong? Amanda Taub points out that last September, a PhD student at the University of Massachusetts named Matthew McWilliams began to do research on a PhD thesis, a dissertation, on this particular topic. McWilliams's topic was authoritarianism, not actual dictators, but rather a psychological profile of individual voters, characterized by a desire for order and a fear of those from other places, fear of outsiders. People who score high in authoritarianism when they feel threatened look for strong leaders who promise to take whatever action is necessary to protect them from outsiders and prevent the changes that they fear most. That's McWilliams's dissertation topic. That's his thesis. Consequently, and quite naturally, after Donald Trump announced for president in July of last year, in July of 2015, when he came down the staircase, if you'll remember, McWilliams naturally wondered whether there was a connection between the authoritarianism he was researching and support for Donald Trump. And he began to survey, to poll, and to seek answers to that question. What he found was that he wasn't the only one who was intrigued by this question. he came across a professor at Vanderbilt University named Mark Hetherington, who, along with a fellow political scientist from the University of North Carolina named Jonathan Weiler, had effectively predicted the rise of Donald Trump in 2009. In 2009, Hetherington and Weiler published a book entitled Authoritarianism and Polarization in American Politics. In other words, they saw earlier in this 21st century the link or the connection between what was happening in our politics and the concept of authoritarianisms. When they published their book in 2009, this was their conclusion. Much of the polarization dividing American politics is fueled not just by gerrymandering or money in politics, or the other variables mentioned, but by an unnoticed, surprisingly large new electoral group called authoritarians. Their book concluded that the Republican Party, I'm reading a quote here, by positioning itself as the party of traditional values and law and order, had unwittingly attracted what would turn out to be a huge, previously bipartisan population of Americans with authoritarian tendencies. In other words, because of the positions that it adopted earlier in this century, the Republican Party was drawing authoritarians from everywhere. The so-called Reagan Democrats, those white, working, blue-collar Americans who traditionally, through the 20th century, voted Democrat, beginning with Ronald Reagan, began to move to the Republican Party because the Republican Party of Reagan tended to tout or to advertise goals and values and positions with which they were most comfortable. In effect, what Weiler and Hetherington's book did in 2009 was predict the rise of Donald Trump, because their conclusion had to be, from the research they did, that what was attracting these people to the Republican Party was the search for the strong man, the search for Tarzan or Superman, the kind of person who would preserve the status quo, resist change, and impose order on the world that many of these people were beginning to see as hostile to them. Traub's conclusion: Donald Trump embodies the classic authoritarian leadership style: simple, powerful, and punitive. When I got this far in my reading, I made the decision that we had to incorporate some of this stuff here to the virtual center because it was unbelievable. What they found in their research, and what McWilliams is finding in his dissertation research, is that this element of authoritarianism is so strong within the American population today, is so extensive and so deep, that the logical conclusion is that Donald Trump is merely the first of a whole series of Donald Trump that our political system seems designed to grow. In other words, as shocked as people are by the Trump phenomenon, what their research indicates is that the depth and the strength, the power of authoritarianism that exists within the American electorate is so strong, so deep, and so powerful that it's going to be looking for Donald Trump long after Donald Trump comes and leaves. If that doesn't make you uncomfortable, it makes me uncomfortable. While all of this is going on, and people begin to connect these kinds of research issues with the candidacy of Donald Trump, the primaries begin. The Iowa caucus, where Donald Trump came in second. And at this point, these political scientists and psychologists partnered with a Washington-based media and polling company called Morning Consult. And they began to poll and survey those voters in Iowa who voted in the Republican caucus. And this is what they found after Iowa. What we found is a phenomenon that explains with remarkable clarity the rise of Donald Trump, but that is so much larger than him, shedding new light on some of the biggest political stories of the past decade. Trump, it turns out, is just the symptom. The rise of American authoritarianism is transforming the Republican Party and the dynamics of national politics with profound consequences likely to extend well beyond this election. So the issue is research, and the issue is more extensive polling. When we talk about authoritarianism in America today, in this election, we're talking about the makeup of what the media calls right-wing populism. Those people who are, the media says, are running against the system, running against the establishment. The popularity of Trump, the popularity of Ted Cruz, the popularity of Bernie Sanders, that what the polarization in our politics seems to be indicating is those who support the system versus those who don't. Under that kind of scenario, our republic cannot survive. This is me talking. Because our republic is based on the idea of deliberation, negotiation, and compromise. Finding things that people have in common rather than the things that divide them. By definition, this does the exact opposite. This seeks converts. This seeks people who are totally committed to the mindset and the psychological profile which seeks to elect a Donald Trump. And any effort to reach across the aisle, to compromise, to work with the other side, to negotiate, is seen not only as weakness, but is seen as heresy. It's seen as going against your core principles. In other words, this authoritarian personality at its heart, at its root, at its foundation, seeks to contradict and to suspend all of the efforts and all of the ingredients of the American Republic as the founders set it up. Madison's idea of screening the public view through a series of elections, through a medium of chosen citizens whose wisdom and of the constant idea of constantly filtering, constantly finding the commonalities that enable people to agree and to negotiate and to compromise and to reach decisions and reach agreements, to bring people together rather than and divide them. This element of authoritarian within the American population is committed to everything that is opposed to those principles of the founders. Thus, it seems to me to totally threaten the very basis of the American Republic. Not only do we have to do something about it, before we can do that, we have to understand it. We have to appreciate it. We have to recognize it for what it is. And as these people set out to do their research, after one primary and the next primary and the next primary, in order to test these theories, they're running into roadblocks. This is the part of this that I find the most astounding. How do you measure? How do you research? How do you test these kinds of principles? You can't survey somebody coming out of a voting booth and ask them, are you a bigot? Are you a racist? Do you hate foreigners? Do you mistrust people who speak with an accent? Do you distrust people with other religions? How do you feel about atheists? How do you feel about people who don't believe in God at all? How do you feel about gay? In other words, are you a homophobe? Do you oppose gay marriage? Do you think that lesbians and gays ought not to be even allowed in this country? How do you ask those questions? You can't ask those questions to anybody because they wouldn't answer. And if they did answer, they'd lie because nobody's going to own up to this stuff. So it seemed like research was coming up against a roadblock, a dead end. And then along came a political scientist from Stony Brook on Long Island named Stanley Feldman. Stanley Feldman realized that if authoritarianism was really a personality profile rather than just a political preference, in other words, if the authoritarian personality really went to the very core of an individual's personality and wasn't just a political choice, a vote for Trump, it went much deeper than that, then Feldman believed that he could get respondents to reveal those tendencies by asking questions on a topic that they didn't find threatening. In other words, you can't go up and ask people if they're a bigot or if they're a racist or any of these other very uncomfortable questions because people wouldn't answer them. Surely they wouldn't answer them honestly. So what Feldman did was really break through because he realized that if you can couch the questions in some other topic, people will answer them and give you the data they want without realizing what they're saying. Feldman, and actually he began this work in the early 90s, Feldman focused on the area of parenting. Parenting. Which was very popular. People were doing a lot of reading and a lot of discussing in the 90s about parenting skills. And what is proper parenting? What must a good parent do? What's the difference between a good parent and a not good parent in terms of the skills that they betray in raising their children? What Feldman did was ask a series of parenting questions, which were really questions designed to extract information about authoritarianism. He came up with 4 questions, 4 very simple questions that seemed to be about parenting, but which were really designed to reveal how the respondent felt about order and conformity and values. Question number 1. Tell me which one you think is more important for a child. To have independence or to have respect for others? There's nothing in that question that would frighten most people. Because most people who have raised children believe that they're experts on raising children, and that they know if their child didn't become an axe murderer, then they were successful parents. So therefore, they got the answers. And they're more than happy to share them. So what Feldman had done was open up the research potential on authoritarianism by linking these questions to parenting. So the first questions, which do you think is most important for a child? To have independence or respect for their elders? Second question, tell me what you think is most important for a child to have. Obedience or self-reliance? Independence or respect for elders? Obedience or self-reliance? Third question, which is it most important for a child to have? To be considerate or to be well behaved? And fourth, which do you think it's most important for a child to have? Curiosity or good manners? So here are the 4 pairs of options. Independence or respect for elders? Obedience or self-reliance? To be considerate or to be well behaved? Curiosity or good manners? People seemed more than willing to answer these questions. Feldman's test proved to be very reliable. He had found a way to identify people who fit the authoritarian profile by prizing order and conformity, for example, and desiring the imposition of those values. In 1992, Feldman convinced the National Election Study, which is a large survey of American voters conducted after each national election, to include his 4 authoritarian questions in their study. And the data began to roll in on authoritarianism. what they found astounded them. It was so significant that they believed it was impossible to ignore. And from that point on, they were able to collect the kind of data which would establish the validity of the extent to which authoritarianism seems to pervade the American society. And of course, authoritarianism can either be outward or it can be latent. There are many people, they found, who were not outwardly authoritarian in their behavior, in their sense of aggression, and all the rest of it, but they were latent authoritarians. It was there once something triggered it. A researcher named Karen Stenner wrote a book in 2005 called The Authoritarian Dynamic. And in it, she talked about the need to activate the authoritarian tendency, a trigger, an event, an issue, something that triggers what's there but hasn't surfaced yet. It seems to me one of the major things that would do it would be the recession in 2007, 2008, the threatened loss of jobs and homes and all the rest of it. Consequently, the results of this research began to document the fact that authoritarianism seemed really to be at the heart of polarization in American politics, seemed to really be at the heart of the inability of the parties to work together. Because the nature of the Republican Party and what it chose to stand for, the values and the principles it stood for, naturally began to attract the personalities that we've been talking about, that these researchers have been looking for. And so once they began to do this, then they came back to the group Morning Consult, which is the media and the polling group. And they began to put together questions that would directly link authoritarianism to politics, to political behavior, to voting behavior. And the 5 sets of questions they put together. The first one was the authoritarianism questions that Feldman had developed for parenting. The second set of questions were the traditional election questions about which party do you prefer, which party affiliation are you comfortable with, et cetera, et cetera. The third set of questions addressed voters' fear of issues, physical issues, things that range from ISIS to Russia to viruses to E. coli to the Ebola epidemic to the increase in car accidents. In other words, how afraid are people? The fourth set of questions addressed policy preferences to see how authoritarianism might cause voters to support particular policies and particular issues. And then the fifth set of questions focused on the issue of social change, fear of social change. Issues like same-sex marriage, a path to citizenship for undocumented immigrants, the extent to which Muslims are building more mosques within the United States, In other words, all of those things that would trigger a response that would reveal innate or latent authoritarianism. This is interesting because of I know we're getting close, but this is interesting because of how recent it is. We wanted to better understand the larger forces that had suddenly made authoritarianism so numerous in America and so extreme. Was it migration, terrorism, perhaps the decline of working class whites? Maybe most of all, we wanted to develop some theories about what the rise of American authoritarianism meant for the future of polarization between our political parties, as well as the Republican Party that had become split within itself and internally divided. 10 days later, shortly after Donald Trump won the New Hampshire primary, which, if I'm not wrong, was like a week ago Tuesday, 2 weeks ago Tuesday, the poll was sent out. 2 weeks later, the results came in. Here are the results. The first thing that jumped out from the data, the researchers said, was how many there are. Our results found that 44% of white respondents nationwide scored high or very high as authoritarians. 19% very high. 44%, almost half of the white respondents in their response to these questions indicated elements of authoritarianism as very high or very high, let me be specific, high or very high evidences of authoritarianism. Today, the data showed authoritarians tend to lean heavily toward the Republican side. More than 65% of people who scored highest on the authoritarianism questions were Republican voters. More than 55% of surveyed Republicans scored high or very high as authoritarians. At the other end of the scale, people whose scores were mostly non-authoritarian, meaning they always chose the non-authoritarian parenting answer, voted 75% Democrat. I would suggest to you there is the polarization. There is the basis of the inability of the parties to work together. There is the basis of opposition to negotiation, deliberation, compromise, and consensus. There's the reason that Washington has stopped working. There's the reason that our political system seems to be breaking down. Let me point out one other thing that isn't here. There's the reason why Rubio and Kasich aren't getting the traction. Because they are offering to bring people together when the fact of the matter is people with authoritarian tendencies do not want to be brought together with others. They want to be united with their own. And they want their own candidate. And the debate right now is it is it Trump or is it Ted Cruz? But it wasn't Jeb Bush. $100 million in advertising he spent with no significant return in votes. What has happened? the traditional political appeals of our two-party system have lost their constituency. Authoritarianism has taken over as the dominant theme within the electorate, especially among Republicans. So the old idea of the two-party system, the acceptance of the idea of loyal opposition, the belief that people can disagree and yet at the same time find ways to agree, is gone. To Republicans, Hillary Clinton threatens the nation. Bernie Sanders threatens the future of America. This is not a political contest. This is a contest for the future, the soul of America. To these people, this is the most important election ever. Because now they have a voice. Now their fears and their concerns and their inner goals and desires have a representative, a spokesman. And they aren't going to accept defeat. They aren't going to allow the Republican establishment to take the nomination away from Trump or Cruz, should Cruz get it. The question that concerns me personally is within the Democratic Party. If Hillary Clinton is viewed as the establishment, and she is the nominee of the Democratic Party, there's no other place for authoritarians to go but to support the Republican Party and support Trump. It seems to me that the parties are beating a dead horse by appealing to compromise and negotiation and togetherness. And think of the speeches that John Kasich has given. He might win today's primary in his own state of Ohio because he's the governor there. But the fact of the matter is, it seems to me that the research that has been done on authoritarianism in the last couple of years seems to me to pinpoint the origin of polarization in American politics. And it seems to me to be the explanation as to why the Republican system created by the founders is in serious jeopardy. Whereas traditionally people look for ways to compromise, for points of agreement, today's authoritarians are looking for people who are looking for just those things, with the goal of silencing them or crushing them. This is a classic struggle between right and wrong, good and bad. There's darn little room here for compromise, I believe. I think this stuff is incredibly important and that it fits perfectly into the mission of the Virtual Center. I hope you'll agree with me. It turns out we will not be having our program tomorrow. It's because of me. I have a follow-up doctor's appointment, and I can't change it. So we're going to basically suspend tomorrow's program here at the Virtual Center, and we'll be back with you on Monday. Have a wonderful break. Thank you so very, very much. Be kind to each other, and we'll see you next Monday. Thank you.